Sorry, what'd you say?
I don't know if there's been an email chain set up, but if there hasn't, could everyone drop their email so I can set one up? From the, could y'all drop your emails like in
Yeah,
chat?
shoot. Yeah, wait, I'll just make the chain if that's cool.
I already have one set up. If you could just drop your emails,
Oh,
that would be
all
great.
right, sick. Thanks.
Oh, Abraham, did you put me in it? Okay, I'll put my email.
I sent a test message. Please let me know if you got it. If everyone got the email, then I'm good to start whenever y'all are.
Okay, yeah, I got it. Is everyone else good? All right, sounds good. And I'll just send the doc after, if that's cool. Mitigating constituents markets don't believe the hype markets are high right now, but are on the brink. Slim Nova 710, Gilead Sciences COVID-19 treatment offset fears on Wall Street. The Dow ended up 1.4%. Nasdaq index jumped 4%. States are reversing reopenings and ordering local businesses to shutter, threatening uneven recovery. Markets hit recently 12 record highs. Data points to an improving outlook as states reopen. The number of jobless benefits dropped to a 4-month low. Eviction moratoriums and unemployment benefits are set to expire at the end of July, pushing millions to the brink. Medicare for All tanks the private insurance industry overnight. 2019, Sanders unveiled a new version of Medicare for All, sparking renewed discussion about how it might affect stakeholders in healthcare. The largest impact by far would be on insurers. Business would be dramatically de-escalated. The private insurance industry would be outlawed overnight. Even perceptions of Medicare for All influence healthcare stocks, which uphold markets and the economy. Gold 20. In COVID-19, healthcare stocks have not dropped much. The Dow lost 19%, yet healthcare lost 11.5%. Why are healthcare stocks outperforming? Because the Democratic nominating process has been a referendum on Medicare for All, the signature policy of Sanders, who dropped out of the race last week. And healthcare is one of the engines of growth in the economy, creating more than 8 million new jobs over the last 30 years. As boomers retire, healthcare spending will increase. From 2009, healthcare is up 660%. Recession is bad. Project 13 explains that as many as 900 million people could fall into poverty in the event of a recession. It causes diversionary war. Foster 16 explains that we took these data on Trump and plugged them into a statistical model that we developed to predict uses of force by the US. The model would predict that President with Trump's numbers would respond to minor economic downturn with an increase in the use of force. A president with Trump's traits would initiate more than one major conflict per quarter. Second is elections. Biden wins now, but voters are malleable. Cone 625 explains that Trump has lost significant ground in battleground states. Trump's advantage among white voters is advantage. Biden now has a 21-point lead among white college graduates. Biden will win with 333 electoral votes if he won all 6 of the states surveyed and held those won by Clinton. Most combinations regulations of 3 of the 6 states would suffice. The plan flips this group several links. First is healthcare as a priority issue for Democrats disproportionately. We'll insert this chart post-COVID from Yale and GMU 2020. Second is old voters. Trump gets credit for the plan, bolstering support among old voters who disproportionately show up to the polls. Lutheran 19, the long-term care benefit could add to political muscle and make the idea more attractive to older voters who might be hesitant but do turn out disproportionately to vote. That dynamic could skew results to favor candidates who endorse Medicare for all. Third is swing voters. McGraw 210. In key swing states, 51 to 56% dislike his handling of healthcare. 2 impacts. First is Trump re-election collapses U.S. leadership mass retrenchment. Border 18. We would be wise to entertain the possibility of a second term of Trump with Trump in the White House. One responsibility retrenchment on of overseas commitments along Trump's instincts. Withdraw from the Gulf, acknowledge Russia's sphere of influence, and withdraw from NATO. Repeat Article 5. American greatness will be redefined around liberating from foreign entanglements. A different Trump, less constrained and more emboldened, where retrenchment becomes attractive. Primacy prevents great power conflict, multipolar revisionism, fragmenting global order, and creates nuclear war. Brad's in element 19. Great power competition entails arms races, security dilemmas, and sharper conflicts. Yet rival powers could overturn regional balances that have underpinned the U.S.-led order. They might construct rival spheres of influence. Great power rivalry can lead to great power war. Beijing and Moscow are exercising aggressively before conflict. Russian doctrine emphasizes the use of nuclear weapons. The world has returned to great power struggle. Russia does not want to be a regional power, aspires to an extra-regional impact. Why also Moscow deploying in the Middle East? Chinese ambitions are bold. Chinese military forces are deploying ever farther. Beijing has projected power into the Arctic and established bases in India and Africa. Xi told the CCP that Beijing could take center stage and act as an alternative to U.S. leadership. Revisionism may be only the beginning. China will move on a grander endeavors. Geopolitical revisionism has precedent intensifying international conflict, and America should bolster its defenses. Second is re-election causes extinction via climate change. Star 19. The difference between electing Trump in 2016 and re-electing Trump would be irreversibility. Trump has announced plans to cancel climate reforms and his pledge to pull out of the Paris Agreement. His re-election would have decarbonization until the second half of the 2020s, encouraging other countries to do nothing. If decarbonization had begun globally in 2000, emissions reduction of 2% a year would insufficient. Now it'll need to be 5%. No one knows when the world might hit irreversible tipping points, which would doom us to catastrophic sea level rise. Climate change is linear. Any reduction of emissions is necessary to limit immense suffering. Wallace was 19. It's not too late. Global warming is not yes or no. It gets worse over time. The next thing getting warming and more suffering, or less warming and less suffering at 2 degrees. Ice sheets collapse, bringing 50 feet to sea level rise, giving conventional decarbonization. This is our best case scenario. The meaning of 2 degrees is genocide. It's better than 3, which went southern Europe would be permanent drought. African droughts for the last 5 years, and climate refugees could grow 24. Medicare for all causes doctor shortages. FTI 2020 explains that healthcare workforce shortages tied to low reimbursement rates, effects on wages could have a significant impact on healthcare workforce access and patient outcomes. Pipes 225 explains that Medicare for all would cause the U.S. to lose 44,000 doctors by 2050. Turn wait times. Conover 19 explains that rationing by waiting is a persistent feature of both the NHS and Canada's single-payer health system. 61% of Americans cited less than 1 month after being advised that they needed surgery. Comparable figures for Canada were 34.8%. Wait times cost 400,000 deaths. Bar cost 17. Increases in wait times for medically necessary care in Canada result in 63,000 deaths. I will send it now. Let me make sure this is the right time. Okay. I just sent it.
All right, I just got it. Is everyone ready? Cool. We will be using the term majority world as a substitute for developing, low-income, or emerging countries. According to World Bank statistics, in the majority world, 80% of humanity lives on $10 or less a day. Anisha and I firm, and contention one is developing world parallel trade drug prices. Taos of Health Economics explains that pharmaceutical companies are hesitant to decrease prices for majority world countries due to the fear of those drugs being resold back in the US market at a lower price, undercutting sales, an economic phenomenon known as parallel trade. As a result, Bosley of The Guardian in 2006 notes that drug companies actively block these nations from obtaining affordable medications, which is why Taos concludes that parallel trade and manufacturers' inability to maintain price differentials is the #1 most important obstacle in lowering prices in majority world nations. Thankfully, Lawson in 2019 writes that Medicare for All mandates a reduction in the price that drugs are sold, cutting pharma's revenue and reducing the risk of parallel trade. Put simply, because pharma companies know that drugs must now be sold at a lower price in America, the fear of cheaper drugs undercutting the market is diminished. This is why Boliki of CGD explains that lower US prices would cause manufacturers to disregard the consequences of parallel trade and extend their drugs into majority world nations. History backs this up. Johnson of the Wall Street Journal contextualizes that when Obama tried to lower the cost of medicine, companies like Pfizer began expanding into majority world nations with cardiovascular drugs. All of these reasons are why Neville of the Financial Times in 2019 writes that majority world countries pay 20 to 30 times more per drug than wealthier nations. Increasing the majority world's access to affordable drugs is crucial. Woolston of Healthy in 2020 finds that a third of the world, or 2.5 billion people, cannot afford critical medication. Thankfully, the World Bank finds that increasing access to existing medicine would save 10 million lives every year. Contention 2 is driving demand. US medical bills are unsustainable because the average American spends more than $10,000 annually on care. Leonhardt of CNBC in 2019 writes that 1 in every $5 earned by the nation's poor goes into healthcare payments. Thankfully, Medicare for All eliminates these burdensome costs, which is why Rapid Shift in 2019 furthers that the program would increase the incomes of the impoverished by 29%. A spike in the purchasing power of Americans would be a boon to the majority world. Liberto of Harvard in 2019 explains that the increasing disposable income, or money that can be spent on extraneous purchases, spurs demand for goods globally. Put simply, the more money Americans have, the more they purchase from abroad. Ye of the New York Federal Reserve confirms that for every 1% increase in US income, imports from other countries increase by 2%. For example, the US Trade Commission finds that an increase in American disposable income in 2018 drove an increase in imports from Africa. This increase in imports drives growth in the majority world countries by increasing capital flows, generating job opportunities, and contributing to industrial development. Liza Brookings in 2019 finds that increasing Africa's share of trade by 1% would generate $70 billion in additional income every single year. Crucially, the World Bank concludes that a dramatic increase in majority world nation trade has coincided with a 50% reduction in global poverty since 1990. Contention 3 is revitalizing small businesses. Marta of Reuters in 2020 reports that while small businesses were already struggling, COVID-19 was the nail in the coffin, with 2/3 facing financial shortfalls. Thankfully, Medicare for All would benefit small businesses by eliminating their top financial concern. Because paying for employees' insurance digs into revenues, Healthcare Now report that small businesses have rated the burden of costly healthcare as their top concern for the past 25 years, with 80% reporting that healthcare is a huge inhibitor to profitability and success. Without the issue of healthcare payments, Healthcare Now concludes that Medicare for All would facilitate entrepreneurship and boost economic growth. Crucially, small businesses are the backbone to the economy. The SBA in 2019 quantifies that these businesses generate 44% of total United States output and 66% of new jobs created. Both of these reasons cause an increase in US economic growth, which drives growth for majority world nations. Kozavox in 2017 reports that the US is an extremely interconnected market, with it being the world's largest economy and a key export destination for many countries. Due to this integration, Aurora of Harvard concludes that a 1% growth in US economy leads to a 1% growth in other countries across the world. Economic growth, by creating job opportunities and catalyzing industrialization, protects the impoverished in these countries by building a domestic economy that can be self-sufficient into the future. This is why the World Bank concludes that economic growth in majority world countries has lifted 280 million people from poverty, and thus we affirm. Are you ready for cross?
Yeah, I'm
Also,
good. Cool. I guess we'll just start cross when I get the doc.
I sent it. Let me know if you got it.
Yeah, sure. All right, cool. I got it. Okay, cool. You good?
Mm-hmm.
Sick. I use the analytic of a majority world.
Sorry?
Why use this majority world analytic?
Because the term developing world is inherently problematic and stigmatizing for these countries.
Okay, so if we can see that the use of that term is rhetorically violent, and insofar as like the contention one's tag includes that rhetorically violent term, is there any way you garner offense off of it?
Yeah, I would still say so. But like we still use the term majority world. We could find all like the command F, like find all, to replace it after we learned of kind of the harms of the term. So that was one
Yeah,
of the
I mean, insofar as the
and like
contention
I
one tag
apologize for
still
that, but
has,
we use the term majority world for the most of the case.
yeah,
And
that's
still
fine.
keep
We'll
the
use it too.
off of that. May I have the next question, please?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so your first contention is impacting to a recession that starts in the US economy, correct?
Yeah.
So how does this recession affect 900 million people if there's only 330 in the United States?
Yeah, I guess it relies on the same warrants that your spillover arguments talk about. It's just that the US is very interconnected, and whatever happens in the US would end up spilling over.
All right, do you have a question?
But yeah, let's talk about this argument pertaining to demand. I'm not sure I understand like the way you get to the impact. Is it that we create aggregate demand to prevent recession, to get out of a recession?
The argument is just that when you increase the spending, like increase the spending that these Americans have, they're going to demand more products that are made in other countries, and that's going to boost their economy. So a 1%
Okay,
increase
but
in U.S. income is directly linked to a 2% increase in imports. Can I have the next
okay,
question?
could I have a quick follow up on that?
Sure.
Yeah, but insofar as like we're in the midst of like a pandemic, would people be trying to save or would people be trying to spend?
I would say that they'd still spend, but you can contest that in rebuttal. We can
Okay.
talk about that more there. So on
Yeah.
your second contention on the election,
Mhm.
is Trump so your argument is that Trump is going to use Medicare for all as a political lever for him to win the election, correct?
Yeah.
So has he historically been for Medicare for all or against it?
We think that he's quite a flip-flopper. I'm sure you'll make the
Well,
response in rebuttal,
pretty
but
adamant on his stances, and I'm pretty sure that anyone would be able to figure that out from the headlines. So has he been in support or against the program in and
I
of
mean,
itself?
he has made remarks from like 2017 where he would support. Huh?
He supported it. Can I see the
He
evidence?
did, and I there
Oh,
is
he
a
did.
he did mention supporting it in 2017, though I'm sure there's conflicting headlines because he is a flip-flopper.
If you have that evidence and you'd send it over in the email chain, that'd be great.
Yeah.
'Neil, can you unmute in the Discord? Neil?
I'm unmuted, Jay. And
used.
if it's cool with y'all, I'll just send the evidence in the middle of Jay's speech. Like I'm about to send it.
Wait, can you just send it before, if that's fine? Like now.
Yeah, for sure.
Is everyone
Let's
good?
put it in verbatim. Yeah, wait, Jay, they want me to send this out before.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
just because like if there's something wrong, I just don't want to like wait
Yeah,
after
for sure.
the
It should have been sent.
I didn't get anything.
I got it.
Remember. Okay.
Or at least I got a notification from Neil.
Oh, I got like a
blank email.
I got a doc. Is that it?
It's
Yeah.
the Blake 17 evidence.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Is everyone good? There is an overview. It's kind of heavy. You might need a different sheet, but it's not enough. Right, perfect. Paraphrasing and constructive as a voting issue creates perhaps 3 minutes is enough time to call for cards and undermines clash because it enables unpredictable evidence spins that are difficult to check, undermines fairness, clash, and fairness are independent voting issues. They create better engagement with the affirmative and more substantive education, which are intrinsic to debate. The no new impact realizations from case it would skew next strategy and force a summary restart. Extinction outweighs 8.0 prevents existential threats which comforts under any framework because it preserves the ability to solve for things like poverty in the majority world. B point is infinite magnitude means infinite probability is irrelevant because infinite risk. C point is probability is relative, whereas magnitude is an objective measure which you can quantify. The paradigm issues on the paragraph shell. No RBIs, you shouldn't win for being fair, and abuse can't be rectified, so it's dropped to Bader. On their case, one overarching response, Tahir and Olstein explains that the plan would open up a bunch of constitutional challenges and lawsuits that were associated with the ACA and even worse with Medicare for All because of its unconstitutionality of the individual mandate. Even if the lawsuits fail, it would allow for people and insurance providers to circumvent Medicare for All and continue the status quo because of the distinction between requiring and banning insurance. On their first contention, remember, it is terminally non-unique. Price controls are happening in the status quo. Florco from just yesterday explains that President Trump signed a slate of executive orders on Friday targeting the high prices of prescription drugs, including a plan to tie the price that Medicare pays for some drugs to the low price that foreign countries pay, which means that since price controls are already happening now, for developing world prices would end up going up to kind of make up for that. Second is pharma will never decrease drug prices in the developing world because their methodology for how they calculate prices is very distinct from what the app says it is. 402 explains that pharmaceuticals determine prices based off of the maximum profit of the drugs that are affordable in the majority world. The drugs that are already affordable in the majority world are because they're developed within those areas, which means that drug companies will set prices the optimal level in order to make profits. In countries where they do have lower prices, it's because they recognize that demand is elastic and people just can't pay can't pay certain prices. And go to their second contention. 3 overarching responses. 1, pandemic's non-unique. The entirety of this argument. Corona means that consumer spending will always be extremely low. There would never be any kind of, even if you give more money to these people, they would still continue to save it, pay off debts, and things such as rent, which which defaults are coming at the end of July, which our uniqueness evidence from Sule Manova is very specific on. Second, Medicare for All would collapse the economy because it would increase spending and increase spending by $36 trillion, which would lead to mass amounts of pandemics and things that are bad. Third is Iglesias 17 explains that it finances through a payroll tax, which creates more, which would be a 7.5% tax generating $3.9 trillion over 10 years. That 7.5% in payrolls means that even if it kind of returns more money or removes or the costs that are removed from enacting the bill would be covered back via things such as payroll taxes, which would create more problems. Then on their third contention, 1 is the ACA marketplace insurance solves revitalizing small businesses. Marketplace insurance means that they no longer have to offer their own form of health insurance, and current Medicaid expansion tracks would inevitably solve this, i.e. Biden getting elected and continuing things such as Medicare expansion or even a public option would allow people to sort of would allow employers no longer to have to offer health insurance, and they can just use the marketplace, which is also cheaper and better. Then second is that they can't solve anything related to small businesses from COVID because the plan would take 4 years, no impact to their arguments because it would because over the course of 4 years, the pandemics would naturally go away. 2 is small business growth would happen. There's so many thumpers to this argument because they've conceded the uniqueness that the small businesses are low right now. The impact is linear, which means that tech sector growth, lower interest rates, etc., all solve this argument, which means all solve this argument. Any instance in which we create conditions that are good for small businesses is still an impact for us. We say that electing Biden and bolstering economic growth, i.e. preventing stock markets from crashing entirely, are good things to prevent these things from happening.
A couple of things. Can I first see the doc for your like overview thing, if that's fine?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then that the ACA like solves back, and that it can be completely financed by payroll tax. That should be good.
Okay. I don't think I said completely financed,
Very
but it would be.
What was your very first response on our case? I just missed it because I was like shuffling papers.
Oh, it was just circumvention.
It was like something about like lawsuits, like.
Oh yeah, it's circumvention. I'll send the card.
All right, sure. If you want, you could just explain it, but that's fine.
Oh, okay. Sure. I'll do that instead. The plan would get circumvented because of a bunch of lawsuits. There's two scenarios. Just like in the ACA, the lawsuits poked a bunch of holes, which allowed people to kind of like make the ACA useless, or lawsuits were just outright deem it unconstitutional, which is more likely because of things like the individual mandate, which has been overturned via local district courts, just not by the Supreme Court because of stare decisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so which cards did you need?
ACA marketplace solves for small businesses and that it can be completely financed by payroll tax.
Okay. ACA was an analytic. I'll send the Iglesias card. I'm just gonna send it in the body because my word is kind of not being great. It's sent.
Okay, this is just a payroll tax card and also the doc for what you said before.
Oh, do you want like the entire rebuttal doc? I did not make one.
Okay,
Sorry.
what are you read off of for your paraphrasing, Shell?
Oh, okay.
And like extinction first thing, like your overview. I don't like really
Sure.
It's the same.
The paradigm issues aren't in here. I can tell you them if you want. Sent. Is that everything?
Yeah, I'm just gonna call Abiram and then we can take prep.
Right. I'm gonna quickly get water.
Are you gonna call me or am I gonna call you? I can call you if you want. Okay, that was a minute 10. Everyone ready? It's going to be on the shell, then on the like framing thing, our case, their case. So like actually really quickly, I don't really know how like theory debate works, but like I'm gonna read a counterinterp. So like I don't know if you flow that like on it or like on a news sheet. So like really however wherever you want to flow it. Okay. On paraphrasing, counterinterpretation, debaters should only paraphrase following NSDA guidelines. Reason to prefer the counterinterpret fits their education standard. 1, paraphrasing forces team to understand the information, to repeat in their own words, solves the offense about more research. But 2, some direct quotes aren't understandable by a layperson, are too convoluted to make sense of when judges don't deliberate over evidence. They see ones. The counterinterpret solves back for all types of judging. 3rd, paraphrasing mirrors the real world as they skill use in papers, speeches, and more movies. You will never hear the word structural realism heard in a presidential debate, so you shouldn't hear any PF round. They talk about time skew. The time skew cuts both ways, having to track down each line of the quoted text skews your time to analyze the context and meaning. Therefore, it's not unique to either interp. Let's go to the extinction first weighing. They tell you the probabilities are relevant. This is not true. If we evaluate every single debate from the stance of a policymaker, we're never going to be looking at real world implications because every single policy is never going to pass because there's always a risk of extinction because the probability is really, really low. But that's important because we would tell you that even with a lower magnitude, if we were really high probability, then our probability is infinite. But then go to our case. On our first contention, start on the response where they tell you that there's always going to be lawsuits. First, the only lawsuit that really matters is the argument they cause about price controls. This is never going to go away because the government is not going to let it happen. The only way for them to afford drugs in either world is if they have price controls. If they don't have price controls, it can never happen. The government is not going to let go of this. But then they say price controls are happening in the status quo. A couple problems here. 1, this argument is only specific to things like EpiPens and like not really the drugs we're talking about. But secondly, superchargers are linked because this specific law unbans reimportation. So companies are now less incentivized to lower price in developing nations because parallel trade is more legal. But then they tell you that the companies want to maximize profit. Yeah, the maximum profit is actually lower than it is right now, but they're charging higher because they're afraid of parallel trade. That's our argument. But then go to the second argument about increasing income. They say pandemics are non-unique, so people aren't going to spend. But we say people are still buying in a pandemic. People are still going out and buying things. They increase income. That means a scalar increase in the amount of things they're buying. But secondly, even if pandemics is true, that means overall they're going to be buying in the future. But then they tell you that Medicare for all is going to collapse the economy. There's no warrant here. But secondly, we'd say there's going to be funding through the deficit, but they don't tell you why the deficit is bad. We say that's not true because Koppel in 2018 tells you the United States has infinite borrowing capacity. The debt isn't going to be bad. Then they say it's going to be financed through payroll tax. 1, a payroll tax on businesses is not going to affect personal people. But secondly, even if it's financed somewhat through a payroll tax, it's still going to be through the deficit, so it's not going to matter. Go to their case. On their first contention about markets, number 1, due to the coronavirus recession, most people have already sold out their stocks. The link is already triggered, but they have no impact. But secondly, William in 2020 gives 3 reasons like stock market crash is inevitable. A, right now the stock market looks good because business and states are reopening, but as the 3rd wave inevitably hits, there's going to be more closures and sell-offs triggering the next crash. But secondly, since the end of March, the CARES Act has been providing unemployment benefits to Americans. However, the lifeline expires at the end of July, triggering a wave of loan defaults and sell-offs. But see, the 3rd, currently most banks have allowed their lenders a degree of forgiveness due to the pandemic, but eventually loaners will need their income streams back. Many Americans won't be able to pay, causing more defaults. Then on their link specifically, Zachary in 2020 writes that the plan does not eliminate private insurance. It only prohibits them from selling plans that cover Medicare for all benefits. He concludes that these companies will just sell additional benefits that are not covered, cosmetic surgery, for instance, instead of going out of business. But go to their second contention about the election. On the uniqueness, even though pre-election polls show Biden ahead, this doesn't mean he's going to win. Lovett and Dubner write, those in support of a presidential candidate, in this case, is Trump, choose to abstain from voting to refrain from admitting their preference for a controversial candidate. Yet during the true election, these voters will always show up and inflate the poll number. Trump is going to win. But then on the link specifically, number 1, passing Medicare for all would make Trump lose some Republican support. Armor in 2020 rates that Trump has absolutely been bashing Medicare for all as part of his campaign strategy, looking like it's going to be passed by the Democratic House, not Trump, because they're the ones who are in power. Trump's been bashing it. But secondly, at that point, he won't be able to garner enough Democratic support to win. This is because Raul in 2017 writes, for the majority of Democrats, Trump's political choices don't matter. They simply choose to oppose him because he's part of the Republican Party, and supporting him would go against their party's tribal-like beliefs. Medicare for all doesn't change that. On their first impact, number 1, the argument is that Trump is going to lash out more because there's no chance of re-election. A president only lashes out to appeal to the voters. His first term was worse, so they're not getting any unique office. But secondly, none of these conflicts ever escalated because no one wants to go to a war with the United States in general. They don't paint a scenario. Don't let them do it later. But on their second impact about the climate change, starting in 2017, writes that Biden would join the Paris Climate Accords. The problem is that the accords burden the private sector with huge taxes and high costs. This is really problematic because carbon emissions are best reduced by private sector free to innovate and respond to market demands instead of central planning. Then go on to their 2 arguments about doctoring and wait times. Group them both. Even if the pay is a little lower, Scott Box in 2018 surveyed doctors and found that Medicare for all is the most predictable payer that doctors deal with, as other private payers set up endless reimbursement, try suspicious contracts, and increase overhead costs. They would have more time freed up. That means that they're going to have more salaries, see more patients, decreases wait times, and the amount of money they're making.
Yeah, good for cross.
Yeah, I'm good.
Um, yeah. Sorry, what were the link responses on elections?
All of them?
Yeah.
The first one was that Trump would lose a lot of Republican support because he's been bashing Medicare for all. So it looks like he's. Wait, actually, yeah. The first one is that he'd lose Republican support because it looks like he's like changing his narrative. The second one was that like basically Trump is like it's going to look like it's passed by the Democratic House, not Trump, because he's been actively bashing it. And the third one is that Democrats will never support him.
Okay. Wait, so Democrats would never support Medicare for all?
It's not that they never support Medicare for all, it's that they will never support Trump.
So then have they not tried to pass Medicare for all underneath Trump's term?
What?
So they haven't tried to pass Medicare for all underneath Trump's term. I think 7+ bills proves you're wrong.
7+ bills?
Yeah.
What is that?
The House and the Senate have attempted to pass 7 different Medicare for all bills.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
If they are doing this underneath Trump's term, why would Democrats not support Trump when Trump wants to help pass it? And
Trump
obviously
does not want to help pass it. Our argument is that Trump has actively bashed it. So when it passes underneath his administration, it looks like it's the Dems.
Yeah.
That's the argument.
Yeah, no. After that, you said he can't garner Democratic support, right?
Yeah, that's our argument, is because for the majority of Democrats, not like every single person, but it's like the fact that they vote by party, not by person. So it's not, that's the argument, that they will never switch parties. They are like,
okay, yeah, that's
unless like Trump suddenly becomes like a Democrat, it's not going to count.
Okay, sure.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about your impact about Trump's leadership causing nuclear war. Who's going to start the nuclear war?
So yeah, the argument is not that like the U.S. nukes anyone. It's that the U.S.'s hedge declines because Trump, post his first term, once he gets reelected, is able to pull out a bunch of treaties and troops in a bunch of areas, mass retrenchment. U.S. hedge declines. Then that leads to a transition war. Can I get a question?
Wait, why does transition war lead to nuclear war?
I think the Branson evidence is like really good on this issue. It tells you.
I read the evidence.
Yeah, it talks about arms race, security dilemmas, Russia's doctrine of using nuclear weapons, etc. There's a lot of different scenarios in which that happens underneath the transition war.
I want to know which scenario you're talking about.
So we just say that. So the scenario for a transition war is that rising powers, i.e., revisionist powers like China and Russia, realize, hey, U.S. hedges collapse and we could become the next hegemon. So they go to war with each other over like small territories, which ends up spilling over, causing mass amounts of conflict, goes nuclear extinction.
Which territories are they going to fight over?
I don't think we need to specify. It's dependent on what's important at the time.
Like, hypotheticals, like some guy wrote, like, do they actually apply? Like, what territory?
Probably our author calls are kind of fire. Also, it's not a question of like this territory is important, this one isn't. It's just that
how this war is going to happen.
Okay. It is a question of rising powers in the midst of a transition of what country has hegemony. Because US hedge collapses, that leads to other countries going to war with each other, trying to become the next hegemon. That checks back against anything like matter rationality. Can I get a question?
Yeah.
Okay. This turn on climate change, why are the accords bad?
Why are the accords bad? Oh, the turn that we read is that Biden would join the Paris Climate Accords, and that's bad because the high taxes that come through the accords actually destroy the private sector's ability to diversify and invest into green technology, which is like the only way to fulfill the zero emissions limit. So it like shorts that.
Are we in them right now?
No.
We aren't?
We're leaving, yeah. Trump left.
Okay, that's fine.
We'll take
Neil.
Yeah, I'm good in Discord.
Okay.
All right, starting now.
Oh, wait. Actually, yeah, hold on. Yeah, can we see the uniqueness evidence? I mean, the arguments against the uniqueness.
For which?
People like people that support Trump don't show up in polls. They like hide their votes or something.
Yeah, they lied to the pollsters.
Yeah, can we see the evidence?
Yep. All right, it's done.
Yes.
The first is like the general theory, and then the second one is like specific to Trump and Biden.
Oh, did you read them both?
I read the first one, but like if you want the second one, it's just there too for context. Actually, I don't know if I did this. Yeah, I don't think I read the second one yet.
Oh, you didn't? You only read Dubner and Levitt?
Yeah. The first one is the general economic theory, like not economic theory, but political theory that people don't vote, and the second one is like specific to Trump and Biden. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What we're up now.
Yeah. Neil, this evidence is just not specific to the
This time. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the order will be paraphrasing very briefly. The framing, then markets, politics, their case, if I have time. Is everyone good? On the paraphrasing show, we're not going for the conceded no RVIs, which means they have no offense here. Then go to the extinction framing. Their only response here is policy paralysis, but the response is terrible. Their arguments are we should be policymakers, but the problem is policymakers obviously do care about the things that are existential threats. That's why we have policy that's specific to North Korea. That's why policymakers care about climate change. Then they also do not have an empiric example of like what certain thing would cause, like what low probability, high magnitude impact would happen in the status quo that policymakers ignore. Go to markets. On markets, we'll concede that like private insurance is allowed under Medicare for all, which means that their arguments never materialize. On the markets argument, On politics, their answers here are not that great. They've conceded the uniqueness claim that Biden is ahead in the polls. Their only argument is that Trump voters abstain in polls and lie to pollsters. But the problem here is that, their evidence is not specific to 2020, and our warrant is way better. We tell you that in 2016, this argument is true for 2016 because people did not want to admit to voting for Trump. The problem is now he's the incumbent, which means that in 2020, people do not care for being outed as racist because of the fact that they are Trump supporters. Like, this argument is just nonsensical because Trump is the incumbent, which means that no one should be ashamed of voting for him, which means they do not lie to pollsters on their argument that he loses base. The problem is they have conceded the Blake evidence, which tells you that Trump does not, like, their like spin on flip-flopping does not apply here because Trump has supported in the past. Then they've the Rapalai evidence tells you that at worst Trump loses 2% of his base because he gains so many Democratic votes but barely loses base. The Yale chart gives you the warrant that they've just flat out conceded this too. The Yale chart tells you that 43% of Democrats rank healthcare as their top priority voters, whereas only like 20-something% of Republicans do. This means he has everything to gain from Democrats but barely anything to lose on Republicans. Then they say that also, like, Republicans just don't care. That's the evidence from the chart. They say Trump does not get to take credit, but this is empirically proven. He took credit for benefits from Obamacare, and he took credit for Obama's good economic policies and the wave that he rode in the first term. Then they say Democrats don't like Trump. They never interact with the chart. It literally tells you that it's post-COVID, which means healthcare is the most important issue. Democrats clearly mirror this on their arguments about hedge. Actually, let's start on climate change. They make one turn. They say Biden wouldn't join, but the problem is pullout in 2020 is unique because that's the only time when we can pull out. On hedge, they say that we're going to like Trump would never lash out, but the problem is they missed the mark here. Our argument is that Trump pulls out of certain region, which enables us to lose hedge and causes hedge collapse. The thing is, there are unique opportunities in the 2020 term that allow Trump to mess things up uniquely. We also think that Biden would not do these things. Oh yeah. So the way you're voting on politics is that they've conceded Democrats are single issue voters on healthcare. They've conceded that old voters disproportionately show out, which means Trump wins. They've also conceded Biden wins right now, which means you get access to the hedge arguments. On their case, their arguments against circumvention, we already just conceded them. Yeah. Yeah, that's all, I guess.
All right. I'll let y'all know when I'm doing.
Okay, cool. Auburn, can you call me? What was your second response to policy paralysis?
Empirical examples.
Huh? What?
No impact to policy paralysis because we're able to make policy actions amidst existential threats now.
Okay, thank you. We have like 25 seconds left.
Give me 1 second. Okay. It's going to start on the extinction policy paralysis wherever you have that flowed. And then my case, their case, and weighing in between. Is everyone ready? Cool. Starting this idea of policy paralysis, they just say the policymakers care about existential threats, but they miss Anisha's response. It's just like anything has a link into extinction. You always prefer probability over magnitude because that's just literally how policies are passed, because everything is preferred on a probability basis because everything links into extinction inevitably. But secondly, they say we have no empiric example. I would say that every single policy passed is an example of how we value probability, or how policymakers value probability over magnitude, because every policy has a chance of linking into extinction, and policies have been passed thus far, which means that they evaluate probability first. But secondly, they give you on like the weighing on this idea, probability outweighs time frame, because they just impact out to like this extinction argument. But we would say that extinction is inevitable. They give you no reason as to why you should prefer time frame weighing. We're already winning on the probability debate. But then at that point, you give us go to our case. You can sign your ballot on our argument about parallel trade. Our argument is that pharmaceutical companies don't reduce prices in developing nations because they fear that those cheaper drugs will be re-imported back to America and undercut their sales to the United States. Talis tells you that this process of parallel trade is the single biggest obstacle to reducing prices, which is why poor nations pay up to 30 times the normal price for everyday drugs. By reducing prices in America through Medicare for all, but Leakey continues that pharma companies would disregard the consequences of parallel trade and expand to developing markets. This is crucial because we tell you that 2.5 billion people cannot afford medicine in these countries, and increasing access to existing drugs would save 10 million people per year. So even if you grant them their impact into war, 2.5 billion is essentially the same magnitude. There's really no magnitude debate. They literally extend no responses to this, so you flow this clean through. But then on the weighing debate, here's why we outweigh. First is the time frame. You have no idea when this hedge decline happens, but right now you know that 2.5 billion people get access when you give them when the threat of parallel trade goes away. But secondly, on like magnitude, like they don't tell you how many people are impacted out by like this war scenario. It's really, really unclear. They don't explain to you why a nuclear war leads to extinction. The lot of warrants are missing on their side. It's really uncomfortable for you to vote there. But secondly, on probability, you don't know where this war is. They never give you any contextualization as to what countries are doing it, what's going to happen. They really, and it's probably because they don't have an answer for that. It's really unclear. Nobody wants to go with the war with the United States. At that point, it's a really clean vote for the affirmative. But even if you buy none of what I said, go to their case. On this election argument, they really mishandled the Democratic support response. Our argument is that because Democrats will never support Trump, even if they pass Medicare for all. They just say that they'll vote for Trump because they got one of their major policies passed. This argument is really silly. Democrats aren't going to change their paradigm shift and their party shift just because Trump passes one of their policies. It's inherently against every single other one of the Democratic policies. He'll never gain their support, and thus he'll never win the election. It's terminal defense to their case. But then on their impact level, they just say that Trump is going to lose us hedge if he's going to continue, if he's going to stay in power. But one, there's not going to be anybody who wants to fight with the United States. The United States hegemony still exists, even if Trump starts to become inherently isolationist. Our large military doesn't change, and our big six diplomacy policies also don't change. I would still say that hegemony still exists. But secondly, secondly, again, their impact is really, really unclear here. They never tell you specifically what actors are going to solve this war. And I would say that because Trump doesn't actually lose this hegemony, he doesn't aggravate anything, there's not going to be any war scenario. You're always going to be preferred voting on a tangible impact and the 2.5 billion people that would get access in a world with parallel trade. Ready for Grand Cross?
Yeah. Y'all can have the first question. Oh, wait. Yeah. The weighing arguments that you made were time frame, no magnitude of the war scenario, and no contextualization. One of them, I'm pretty sure, was no reason why nuke war leads to extinction. I'm pretty sure this is literally a line from summary. Nuke war causes extinction.
Yeah, there's no warrant for that. Why does nuke war cause extinction?
Oh, no.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, you can take a question.
Okay, sure. So, okay, let's talk about why the Democrats won't change their party. So, has there ever been a Democratic policy in the past passed under a Republican president?
Probably. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Kerry and Romney are pretty good examples, but they were advocating for policies, haven't actually passed them.
Right. why does healthcare come before their own party beliefs?
What? So
Yeah,
the chart that we
so
have
this is
cited says
answered
that
by the-
43%.
And that
sorry.
your chart says this, but like I bet you your chart doesn't like say like, oh, their party is like sixth
Yeah.
on.
So
like,
there were also warrants given in this round specifically, i.e., how like coronavirus has made it such that healthcare matters a whole lot. Republicans also like healthcare.
your arguments pertaining to like Trump's record as president and that Democrats will never vote for Trump as a person are also just answered by the chart. If you look at the chart, it literally says Democrats care so much more about healthcare. 23% more Democrats care about healthcare than
a lot more about healthcare. The problem is that just because Trump passes one policy does not mean that they automatically get the Democratic support.
I think characterizing Medicare for all as like one policy is not
making ground. That's just like he's not like just because they pass one policy does not change the fact that Democrats are fundamentally
like it's not like any regular like policy.
Don't like never vote for him.
Like, it's literally the most revolutionary healthcare policy. It's the most democratic healthcare policy.
Change the fact that Democrats are still at odds with Trump outside of healthcare.
Yeah.
There's still so many other reasons for them to vote.
That's fine.
The chart disagrees, and you never read a card.
That is a card, but all right, you can have a question.
Okay. Sure. The arguments for why policy paralysis, just like every single policy now means that there is paralysis. How? I thought the notion of policy paralysis is that we
evaluate things based on a probability perspective. If policies have been passed in the status quo, policies have been passed, right? Like for X amount of time. And that means that policymakers evaluate things based on a probability, not necessarily a magnitude framework, because every
political capital isn't like stunned to just one policy. Yeah. Obviously, policymakers care more about threats of climate change and North Korea launching nuclear weapons in Iran, which is why they prioritize those policies first, right? I'm not saying that policymakers can only do one thing at one time. Like, obviously, there are separate.
It's like empirically proven that we do care about high magnitude impacts.
I'm sure we care. Our impact is like really high magnitude as well, but you need to weigh the probability of the high magnitude impacts, and that's our argument.
Oh yeah. Sorry. The order will be framing, then elections. Is everyone good? Two framing arguments were going on extinction. First, one point is it controls the probability of being able to resolve those other threats that they talk about, i.e. poverty in the developing world, in the majority world, and other scenarios. Second is that extinction outweighs independently, because an infinite magnitude means that probability is irrelevant, because if there is a 1% probability, it forwards as an infinite risk. These are two conceded scenarios for this. They've just said paralysis. Anything has a link in extinction, so policymakers will always be paralyzed. One point is the proof that they are passing policies right now disproves. The second is that they have conceded the argument that they prioritize threats that are existential first, like North Korea, Iran, and climate change, because those have the largest magnitude, which means that magnitude is definitively going to come first. They have not read any kind of warrants as to why probability outweighs magnitude. They have just said that their arguments outweigh on probability, but insofar as we are winning the meta weighing of this debate, you should vote on the best existential threat, meaning that we don't have to answer case. Go to the elections decide. The problem with their first response that Democrats will never change stances over just one policy is that 43% of them care about healthcare the most, and coronavirus has supercharged that to the point where they are single issue voters. There's no quantification for this argument, which means that you should prefer our empirics about how most of them would vote. Second is that Trump has nothing to lose here, because we'd only lose 2% of his base because they're super loyal. This means that this definitively outweighs. They've conceded the old voters link, so we're going to extend it. It tells you that old voters disproportionately show up to polls and need healthcare the most because of the long-term care benefit associated with it, which means that our arguments uniquely come first here. That means that Trump would win underneath the scenario where he passes healthcare, because he would appease old voters. The impact is U.S. hegemony. U.S. hegemony collapses because he would pull out of a bunch of treaties post-election. That is the time frame analysis. Post-re-election would be the point where U.S. hegemony declines. The only that would lead to these kind of that would lead to transition wars as Russia and China become more revisionist and try to become the next hegemon. That leads to nuclear war. That causes extinction. U.S. hegemony still exists, and the U.S. hegemony definitely doesn't exist when he pulls out all of his military diplomacy. The impact is definitively clear. We have just explained it to you. The arguments about time frame was answered above. The no magnitude of the war scenarios or explanation of why nuke will cause extinction. This is infinitely regressive, i.e. they can ask, like, why does nuke winter cause extinction? Why does starving cause extinction, etc. Like, you should hold the line. The analysis was good enough, and if we want sufficient weighing for why there is a risk, you should vote affirmative.
Is everyone ready? It's going to be framing our case, their case. So many papers. All right. On the framing, remember that they don't have a link into extinction. They just say there's going to be nuclear war, but at best, give them that nuclear war kills 1 billion people. We access that too because we tell you that 1 billion people are going to die with lack of access to drugs. They don't contest this at all at any point in the round. We have the same magnitudes. At that point, that's where you get into our link about why probability matters as well. You need to weigh the probabilities into high magnitude impacts. Otherwise, there is no way of differentiating because anything has a link into extinction. They say the risk is infinite, but there's no way of comparing anything if every single thing has a link into extinction. But then they tell you that then they concede Abiram's most important response is where he tells you that probability outweighs on time frame because an extinction is completely inevitable, but they don't give you a time frame as to why their argument matters. They're not giving you any time frame here. You're not voting for it. That's conceded. It's terminal defense on the weighing. Go to our case. Our argument on parallel trade is simple. We tell you that right now in the current status quo, drug companies are afraid that people are going to re-import drugs to the United States, which is why they rack up prices in the developing world. But insofar as there's price controls, they lose U.S. profits, so they're able to raise or decrease prices in the developing world, giving 2.5 billion people access to drugs. They concede this in every single round. It's clean offense for us. But the reason why it outweighs is because on probability and all the weighing mechanisms that Abiram did in summary, he tells you it's really, really specific that we tell you how this happens, where it happens, and how many people are affected, whereas they can't give you a single war scenario. Consider this weighing terminal defense on their case, because if they can't tell you where the war happens, there's literally no way it happens. You can't just bring up some random thing with no warranting and just expect it to go through because it has high magnitude. But go to their case. There's terminal defense here too, because they concede the raw evidence really, really badly into every single thing, every single speech in the round. They just try to extend their empiric and finagle out of it by saying, oh yeah, people vote for healthcare. No, our argument is that they will never switch no matter what happens insofar as they vote by party, not by person. It does not matter if they pass one policy, they ultimately vote by party. Unless Trump suddenly becomes a Democrat the next day, they're not voting for him. It does not matter that he passed the healthcare policy. They don't do the analysis. Our card does the analysis the entire round. But even so, they really, really mishandle the argument that no one wants to go to war with the United States. The military doesn't exist. This is also, again, terminal defense here. The impact is unclear. They say China doesn't want to go to the war with the United States. Again, we have a high military presence.
Good round, y'all.
Good round.
Good round.
Round.